Movement is an exploration of self. It's understanding who you are. You stop moving, you start dying. We are so far out in distractions. We're so far away from what truth is. We're scared of really understanding ourselves. Yoga is the journey that brings us to the present moment. It confronts you with who you are, and there's nothing to hide behind. Everything could be a tool towards yoga, playing with your kids, walking through nature. It's the intention that guides you to be here, to cultivate awareness. I've always been a mover. I've done physical stuff my entire life, but I've never done it with the intention to understand who I am. I was trying to prove to myself that I was good enough. And what I realized is I have nothing to prove. We're programmed to have this sense of wanting more as soon as we get something. If we live our lives like that, we're never going to be satisfied. In yoga, it's a balance of the idea of santosha, which is contentment, and tapas, which is your desire to give your best. When you learn to be content with who you are and at the same time give your best, you'll find peace. Find what your meaning is. Your purpose is simply to share that. Because if you found something that was so important to you, that means so much to you, why would you not want to share that?
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Yoga is everywhere these days. We see classes on every corner. But what is yoga? Is it a movement practice? Is it a mental practice? There's a massive debate on. And that's why I was really excited to speak with Dylan Werner this week, which is known as one of the leading yogis in the world. He's got massive following on Instagram, known for these really strong movements and hand balancing. And he says that yoga is really union. And he had an incredible journey of finding this practice. He started off as a Marine, he became a firefighter, but he never found peace until he found this yogic practice. So I was really happy to talk to him. He's got an incredible journey, really deep, really controlled with his consciousness, and he has a radical view about what yoga is. And he says, you know what? You don't have to agree with me because I'm doing this for me ultimately to find out what my meaning is in life. So sit back and enjoy this incredible conversation with Dylan Werner. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dylan Werner, the former U.S. Marine Corps firefighter and wrestler turned world-famous yoga instructor. After finishing your tour in Iraq, you spent 8 years as a paramedic and firefighter in California. Then you found yoga through martial arts and later realized you wanted to dedicate your life to the practice. Today, you've given more than 400 workshops in over 60 countries, taught at some of the world's most prestigious yoga studios, and have a massive following on social media. Dylan, welcome to London Real.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here. You know, we got a lot of cool things to discuss. I thought I'd kick it off by talking about human movement, because if you look at London Real for the last 6 or 7 years, you know, I've had this journey with some pretty cool movers out there. And, you know, whether it was Dorian Yates, who kind of had me do yoga for the first time, 4 years ago, and then Ido Portal with movement, and people like Elliot Hulse saying the body is the mind, like I've kind of got an education that this body is not just part of the equation. And I was just wondering about your journey with movement, and did you have people that kind of showed you the way?
Yeah, movement is an exploration of self. It's understanding who you are. I think what brought me into yoga, because I've always been a mover. When I was 5 years old, I started lifting weights. Someone gifted me this Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania workout thing, and it had like these 3-pound weights and its workout poster, and I would sit in my room, because I had kind of like a sad childhood. I was an only child and also the oldest of 8, but that's a whole another weird story. But
Okay, sad. So weird family dynamics.
yeah, weird family dynamics growing up. So I spent a lot of time by myself, and in that time I found kind of fitness, and I was into that.
And this was your own thing, like your family didn't have a fitness history?
No, my dad wasn't into fitness. My mom wasn't. No one in my family has ever done fitness.
And this is pre-internet.
This is pre-internet.
So Hulk Hogan inspired you.
Hulk Hogan, and at the time I didn't even really know who Hulk Hogan was. I was born in 1980, so it was kind of that WWF before it was WWE.
Right.
That was like a popular thing, and so I had these weights, and I was always small. I was always the smallest one, and so I wanted to be big.
Right.
And so I started out working out on my own, and I got into wrestling really young. And I think wrestling really helped me understand my body and how to move other people as well, which surprisingly has helped me a lot as a yoga teacher, because yoga is about creating connections, and we are so interconnected in ourselves. So this is like an idea called biotensegrity, where everything in the body is under tension and compression. But we're so interconnected that whatever I do in my body, if I move a hand like this, it affects my entire body. But if I reach out and grab your hand, whatever I do affects your entire body.
Right. It introduces all these new degrees of freedom and feedback.
So I understood this first as a wrestler, and I know you do BJJ.
Yeah.
And so you understand like how you move someone else, you could adjust their weight and submit them however you want. But when I took this into yoga, it was more like, how can I create space by establishing a connection that is one rather than two? And when you're a really good mover of your own body, you become a good mover of other people's bodies. And so this was kind of like my first understanding of really moving. And then from there, I did lots of stuff. I was growing up in Southern California. I was into snowboarding and wakeboarding, and started rock climbing at a really young age. And rock climbing is what I did for a long time before I even got into yoga. And yoga is one of those things that introduced me, rock climbing is one of those things that made me want to do yoga more, because the yoga practice helped my rock climbing.
It did.
In the beginning, and then eventually yoga took over, because there was something more than just movement, or at least for my entire life, there was something missing. I had always been a mover, but yet there was something missing.
Right.
And I explored kind of everything. Like it was always, how can I just be the better? Was the only thing I wanted to do, and I had all these goals. I wanted to be a firefighter, so paramedic, and I know I wanted to be a hero. I think I just wanted to be bigger than what I was always.
Right. Kind of like Hulk Hogan, right?
Kind of like Hulk Hogan. Yeah, I didn't think it'd come back to that so much, but yeah.
And it's interesting to hear that you said that kind of wrestling, which is obviously in martial art combat with another human being, and I guess you probably did freestyle wrestling in high school, or you moved to Greco-Roman quickly?
So I did collegiate in high school.
Okay.
And freestyle a little bit in high school, and then after high school, when I joined the Marine Corps, I was on the all-Marine wrestling team, and that's when I got into Greco. So it was mostly Greco and a little bit of freestyle training, and that was the majority of my Marine Corps career, except for the little bit of time I spent in Iraq. But most of my time in the Marine Corps was spent wrestling.
Wow, so I wrestled 1 year in high school at Torrey Pines High School, and before that, I was like the skinniest, geekiest science kid. And I went to this Torrey Pines High School, which was like the Beverly Hills 90210 of San Diego. And my dad lived there, and I transferred in my junior year, and there was only one kid in class that no one else wanted to talk to. And I talked to him, and he said, "Brian, let's go to wrestling." So in the course of 2 months, I went from the skinny kid to like this bigger kid. And I got put through some of the most strenuous things. Like, I didn't even comprehend what it was like to be in a wrestling room. And we weren't even a top school. But it taught me a lot about exertion, about control, about pain thresholds. But I only did it 1 year, but it was something I really value,
Yeah.
But it's weird. Most people would probably think, how could that ever apply to yoga? And I want to talk about yoga, but most people see that as kind of a singular activity. But you're saying it's not necessarily a singular activity, and you can learn something from that martial arts part.
Yeah, it's more with the wrestling or martial arts or moving somebody else that comes into teaching yoga and assisting other people. Because when you assist somebody into a pose, you're essentially creating space for them to go deeper, the space for them to explore, and you create this connection, this unity or this oneness, which is really what I think we all have a different opinion of what yoga is. Just like most things, we define things with words, and to define anything with a word, you have to create some sort of boundaries around it. You being like a scientist person, you understand that to understand something, you break something down, you create its limitations. Most things we understand it by the opposite. We only understand light by darkness or darkness by light, hot by cold. There's a beautiful saying that I love that a blind person will never know darkness. And it's really helped to teach me perspective, because without light, how can someone know darkness? So we define things like this, and everyone's always trying to define what yoga is. But the second that you draw a line in the sand, you create a division. There's two sides. So yoga means union, it means connection. So to put yoga into a box by that very nature with language, which we use to understand things, immediately makes it so we can't understand what it is.
Yeah. I think it was Terence McKenna that said, I don't know who discovered water, but it certainly wasn't a fish. And I think his point is that, sometimes we're in this reality and we don't know we're in there, and we're trying to define things. He also said that after you come back from, say, a plant medicine ceremony, which I've had a few, when people try to ask you what happened, language cannot even begin to explain what happened. So we're really limited by our language.
Exactly.
Some say it's like, a prison in some way, because all these words have these different meanings, It's funny because I was just with Sadhguru, and he said exactly what you just said when he defined yoga. He said, yoga means union. Everything in your experience becomes one. All existence is just one energy. And it's interesting that you just said the exact same thing. And a lot of people want to know what it is, and a lot of people have different versions of what it is, right?
The thing about truth, and why you constantly hear the same thing over and over from different people said in different ways, because there's only one truth. It's apparent. It's self-apparent. And when you realize what it is, that's the only thing you want in your life, and you move after that. There really is only one truth. So in yoga, the word for truth is sat. And sat means unchanging. Well, if we know that the universal truth of nature is that everything is changing, everything in the universe is continuously moving through growth or decay. Nothing is ever staying the same. Like in mathematics, we have things that are constants, but if I were to take something, if you go to Greenwich and you look at like what a foot is, or a meter, like, or even where Greenwich is, it's not even where it was when they made Greenwich Mean Time.
Right.
It's moved quite a bit, because everything is continuously changing. And so how can something be true if our definition of truth is that which does not change? Because if it's true, then it's always true, it always was true, it always will be true. And if everything is changing and there's not one thing in the physical world that we know that is unchanging, then that means nothing is true except for one thing, which is the present moment. The present moment is this window that we have that has been here since, time is only a way that we understand the present moment. It's actually an illusion. Yogis call this Maya. Maya means not as it appears. Like a magician doing a trick, it's not what it seems to be. And we spend so much time thinking about time, the future and the past, which time, when we think about time, we never think about time as now. As present, that's truth. That's actually what we're seeing. And so for us to be true is for us to be here, to be present, to actually be in this moment, to live our life in this moment without the stories that we create, the projections of ourselves in the future, the ideas of ourselves in the past, or the stories that we bring from the past. All these things bring us out of the actual reality, which is now. And all the truths that you'll understand about life, the truths that are unchanging, you'll understand them in the present. And so when you talk to people that are seeking for the truth, for spirituality, this idea of what spirituality is.
You don't like that word?
It's not that I don't like that word, it's like we define everything. So, and we have different definitions of what spirituality is. I looked it up in the dictionary because I think I wrote in a blog or a post or something, I wrote mind and body connection, because that's what yoga is. When you talk about movement and what brought me into yoga, it was understanding that my mind is not different than my body, and it's not different than my spirit. But spirit is such an interesting word that's defined in so many different ways. If you're religious, it's your soul. It's this thing that is also unchanging that moves on to heaven or whatever, or hell, or it's something separate from you, though.
Right.
Generally, the way that spirit in that way is thought of. The body is different than the spirit. But the way that I think about spirit is nature. And there's 3 types of nature. We have inner nature, which is our spirit. It's our self. We have outer nature, which is what we're continuously moving away from, which is why we can't understand what it is to be here, because we are so far out in distractions. We're so far away from what truth is. We are distracting ourselves because we're scared of the third nature, which is true nature, which is the unity of all things, and really understanding ourselves as not separate from everybody else. It's this removal of ego.
And for you, yoga was the way to first feel that.
The first way to feel it was jumping out of planes.
Okay.
I had accomplished everything that I thought I wanted to in life. I put out goals, and I think I saw a TED Talk with you talking about that, like getting all the things that you want. And I think anybody that goes out and sets goals and then accomplishes them realizes that this isn't it. This isn't the way. There's nothing in goals. Because goals
nothing in goals, or did the goals also pull you along the journey?
There's nothing in goals, because goals are always going to be in the future. And so therefore they're never in reality. And once they become to reality, you realize that they're no longer a distraction. And so you get there and you feel like, I need another distraction.
Right, okay.
So yeah, I have goals, but my goals they're a little bit different. My goal is to be my best self every day. Because we have 2 choices, we grow or we die. That is the change that the universe is telling us. You're either growing or you're dying, and nobody wants to die. And so we need to continue to stress ourselves, to challenge ourselves, because all growth happens through stress and challenge. It's how life emerges.
It's a weird dichotomy, isn't it?
It is a weird dichotomy, but if you want to...
Stress and challenge implies almost a goal, because I want to do this thing, but we want to also not be goal-oriented, right?
In yoga, it's a balance of the idea of santosha, which is contentment, and tapas, which is your desire to give your best. So when you learn those 2 things, when you learn to be content with who you are, and at the same time give your best, you'll find peace.
Right. And is that something that's never attainable for a brief moment, something to dream about, or something that yogis can do?
It's an interesting thing that you said attainable, because that has the idea that there's something to obtain. And that's, as soon as you think that, you'll never get there.
But if we want both of those things at the same time.
That's the other one, want.
Want.
The Buddha said the root of all suffering is wanting what you don't have or not wanting what you do have.
Okay.
So,
but if I go to practice and I'm thinking, you just mentioned these 2 practices.
It's
hard to identify them and not want them, right?
It's not the desire to it. It's more like a drive just to give. When you give something, you don't want anything in return. Not when you're truly giving. We've become a society of takers. We treat everything as resource. Nature is a resource, and so we just take from it and we don't give to it. And we think that this is that something to obtain. Obtaining is taking. We're getting something from it. And then we carry that on to the relationships we have with other people, with our friends and our family and our loved ones, and we take from them like they have something to give to us, and we define this as love. And we think that it's other people's jobs to make us happy, and really all it is attachment. There's no connection there. When you start giving, and stop taking, stop trying to obtain something, then you start being. And that's really what yoga is. And that's what truth is. It's about being. You don't have to do anything. It's simple. And yes, there is that, like, I don't want to die and I want to grow. And in that, and I'm subject to this as everybody. I don't want to die. I know I will. I'm more okay with it now than I ever have been.
But now yoga also looks like a physical practice. And when I go watch people doing the physical practice, they're trying to do certain things. So kind of by definition, I do have these kind of micro goals. Now, I can go in there with a giving mentality of, you just said those two things again, where I'm going to do my best and be satisfied kind of thing.
Right. Well, the defining yoga again, so everything that I say about yoga will slightly be untrue in a sense, but it kind of helps us to understand. Yoga is not something that you do, it's not something you obtain, it's not something you go to, it is a state of being. It's you realizing the truth. It's a word that describes it. And its root from Pali, it means use, or to yoke, or to bring together. As there's not two, there's one. Everything else that we do that we call yoga are tools that we use to obtain. And it's just like you use any kind of tools to build a house or bake a cake or paint a picture. It's the tools that help us to bring us to that point, which ultimately is here. Yoga is the journey that brings us to the present moment, where you've always been. But sometimes you have to go over there, and you have to go over there, and you have to go over there to realize that you've been here the entire time. It's how we understand things by the opposite. Just like we need light to understand dark, we need there to understand here.
And the tools themselves are some of these physical practices?
Yeah, physical practices, because the mind and the body and the spirit or the nature are one.
Right.
And so we use the mind to understand the connection to the other two. We sit down and we meditate, and we use the body to understand the mind and the spirit. We use the mind, we sit down and we meditate to understand the body and the tendencies of the body.
Let me ask you a question. You wrestled, and competitively, right? So and for people that don't understand the wrestling room, again, it's a very intense martial art. I've done jiu-jitsu and Thai boxing and boxing, but wrestling, it's probably one of the most intense, of one person trying to break into the one spirit, and it can be pretty all-encompassing. You also climbed, but you never had that mind-body connection in those sports until you came to yoga? Or did you?
I always did.
Okay.
And I think that's why I've been a chaser of extreme sports. And I told you the first time I really, really felt it and understood it was skydiving, because have you ever been skydiving?
Yeah, twice. It's pretty intense.
When you're there and you're jumping out of a plane, you're present.
Yeah.
And you have no choice. There's nothing that you can do other than be present with what's happening, because it's nothing that you've experienced before. But imagine you do that 100 times or 200 times or 1,000 times or 10,000, whatever it is. It eventually will become mundane or routine, or, I would jump a lot, and in my jump, I'd be thinking about my next jump, or how quickly can I pack my pack, or if I have enough time to make 5 or 10 jumps in that day, or whatever it is.
That's dangerous too, right?
Yeah, in a sense. The only difference between yoga and wrestling and gymnastics or anything is the intention behind it. Everything could be a tool towards yoga, playing with your kids, cooking a meal, walking through nature, sitting by a stream. All those things could bring you to here. It's the intention that guides you. It's the intention that tells you to be here, to cultivate awareness, to relax, to settle into what this is. And that's all yoga is. Or the tools of yoga. It's an intention and essentially a pathway that you follow for that intention to find unity and connection.
Knowing what you know now, would you have jumped different, wrestled different, if you had kind of thought it from a yogic perspective,
Everything I would have done in my life before now would have been better. And not only that would I have been better at it, but how I would handle every situation would be better.
What do you mean by that? This taking versus giving?
It's when we project ourselves into a false reality, which means into who we were or who we want to be. It takes us away from the truth. The more that we place ourselves in the middle as we are because everything that we know happens through our experience. So it's really hard to remove yourself as the experiencer. Everything is subjective, but subjectivity can never be truth, can never be objectively true. And so how can you experience something that's true and real and make choices that are real if you yourself aren't seeing them as how they actually are? In yoga, it's called vasana. And vasana literally means smear. Like if you were to smear paint on something, or if you were put on a pair of red glasses, everything that you see is red. So if you go to paint a picture and you pull out your paints and you start painting it, or I don't know if you've ever worked on your computer with the flux thing, so it turns the screen orange, and then you try to edit. I edit photos because I'm a photographer, and then try to edit photos and not realize that your screen's orange, and then you look at it and you're like, why are my colors so messed up? Right. This is how we treat life. We treat life as how we see them, not how they are. And so when you are mindful and aware and you remove yourself from that, you start seeing things as they are rather than how you are. And if you make decisions on how things are, then the results of those decisions, that happens, the choices that you make, you'll actually get what you are set out for, the intention that you put into it. But if you start, it happens all the time with relationships that we have. If we get in a fight with someone that we love, or an interaction with a stranger or something, you only see things how you're seeing them. And a lot of times it's from the emotions. Emotions are one of the worst vasanas that we have because it alters our mind so much. This modification, or in yoga it's vritti, it changes you so much. So once you learn to remove those emotions, or even understand that you have them and stop looking through them, and you see things as they are, the choices that you make it changes everything. So
you wish you had made different choices?
I wish I would have made so many different choices.
Like what?
A lot of the choices that I wish I would have made different. It's hard to look back and say I wish I would have changed things, because I am finally at a place where I'm happy with who I am. And so if I change those things, would I be who I am now? But also looking back if the things I think that I would have changed the most are how I've treated a lot of people in my life, because I've thought I was a victim. When you're in a conflict and you think that you're a victim, you're seeing things as you are. So when I was, I didn't think I was going to talk about this, but it's good to get in these kind of things. So when I was growing up as a young kid, I had a stepmother who was very cruel to me. She was a little bit physically abusive to me and mentally abused me a lot. She had alcohol problems and everything else. And I spent my whole life until a few years ago feeling like I was abused and a victim from this, because I only saw things, first of all, as not who I am, but a 5, 10 to 13-year-old boy. So that's not me. That was somebody else. My memories that I have from there might not even be real.
Right.
Because we create so much. If we go back to our past and we think of how things happened, that's not how they happened. We have so many layers of glasses on top of that we see situations distorted, and then we remember things through emotions, and if the emotions were heightened and the scars are there, nothing is true that you think happened.
Right, but something also did happen.
But something also did happen. Right. But what affects you now is if you get in a fight when you're a kid, you don't feel the pain from the fight later on. You feel the emotional response from the fight later on. But if I think back to when I was a kid and my stepmother, who was early 20s, not ready to be a mom. My mom had me when she was 19. My stepmom was younger than my mom. And so back like that, and I actually see things as how she saw them, and I remove myself as somebody that has to deal with this kid that she probably didn't want to be a mom of, her problems, everything, and it wasn't about me. And as soon as you realize that it's not about you, then you no longer have to carry that role of being a victim. You no longer have to carry that this is something that I did. It's just something that happened. there was a physical thing, but why am I carrying that emotional baggage with me? It's like, you ever seen that show Hoarders?
Yeah.
So I actually have a friend who works on that show as a camera guy.
Okay.
And I worked as a paramedic and a firefighter for 8 years. So going into these houses of hoarders, it's the craziest thing. It's an absolute sickness, and it destroys people. It destroys who they are. It destroys their families, anybody that they come in contact with. And how you cure a hoarder is you throw away their shit. That's what they do. They go in there and they go, "Do you need this?" And yeah, I need that. You need this VCR box from 1980. You don't even have the VCR anymore, but you need this. And so systematically teaching them to get rid of the things that they don't need, they create space. What we don't realize is that we're all hoarders. We're carrying around our past. We're carrying around all the garbage from when you're a little kid. I carry around the garbage from, I'm going to call it, it'd be amazing if this guy's watching it, but I remember in the 3rd grade, Trevor Jenkins called me Lord Wiener. And that like hurt me.
Because your last name, Werner Wiener.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then it was Dildo Wiener. And it's like names hurt when you're a little kid, when you're fragile and you don't have an identity. Right. Now it's like, someone called you a name, you don't care because you don't have any identity to that. But when you're a little kid and you're trying to form that, that stuff sticks with you. Now it doesn't stick with me. It doesn't bother me if someone calls me Dildo Wiener or any other name.
But you remember Trevor Jenkins.
I remember it.
It's a great bully name too, Trevor Jenkins.
Oh, it's such a great bully name. And I think he moved to San Diego also
afterwards.
But anyways.
So that's some of the things you were hoarding.
No, I wasn't really hoarding that, but I was hoarding a lot of stuff from my childhood for sure.
And you were able to see this through yoga.
Through yoga, yeah. Well, yoga is just a word to define understanding how things are. And it was when I understood how things are. You don't have to be a yogi to do this. Anybody could do this.
But without the yoga practice, you probably wouldn't have had this realization.
Yoga was the route that I took.
Okay. But it wouldn't have necessarily happened through skydiving or mountain rock climbing.
It didn't for me.
Right. Okay.
So.
Yeah.
And I think that's, yoga is, some people like to define themselves as yogis because they like warrior too. If you went 150 years ago, people weren't doing warrior two, they weren't doing any asanas, and there's a lot of yogis. You go to India, everyone's a yogi. No one does yoga. It's like, so what we think.
Explain that.
We think yoga is stretching and poses and whatever, but those are only just tools to this. And so if you understand that where you're going is here, and you understand that you want to see the truth, it doesn't matter what those tools are. I think meditation is one of the greatest tools that we could use. Yoga, the physical part, is just a moving meditation. It's through the body to understand the mind, to understand presence. Nature is an even stronger one when you sit in nature. Because you look at nature is in itself in perfect harmony and balance in its natural state. And we are nature. Alan Watts said, we think that we came into this world like we're an alien or something separate, something different from this planet, but we came out of this world like leaves from a tree, and we really are that. And the leaves are the same as the tree is the same as the leaves. It's saying that the drop of water is the ocean or whatever that.
Yeah.
When we are able to see this connection and start to see ourselves as one, then it's all this pathway to truth.
And yet we're the species that kind of engineers ourselves away from nature in so many ways. It kind of cleverly pushes us to these other places.
Yeah, it's when you have to be confronted with yourself, and that's what the present moment does, is it confronts you with who you are. And there's nothing to hide behind. There's nothing to see things different. And so you have to face all those things. I remember you talking about fears. Fears is you have a fear, and that's a calling card for you to walk into that. Well, most people are afraid to look at themselves in the mirror. Most people are afraid to see who they really are, to see inside their soul, to be honest with themselves. But that's what we need to do. And that's when you see that that VCR box is useless and you're able to throw that away. That all this stuff, this past that you've been hoarding, that you've been holding on to is just garbage. Yet you've occupied your life with it so much that you have no space for anything real to take place. In Buddhism, they're always talking about emptying. It's about becoming empty. Well, empty is a process. You know, when you think like this glass here, as I drink it, I'm making it empty. Right now it's full. It's delicious, and as I drink more of it, it'll eventually become empty. But once it's empty, it's spacious. That means that there's room to fill it with something. Well, if that was filled with urine, I'm not going to drink it. It's full. It's just garbage. I don't want what's in there. For me to put something, to make that vessel, we're vessels, we're containers that hold nature. To make that useful, I have to empty out what's in there to fill it with what I want. But we can't do that because we don't want to confront what that is, because there's honesty there.
And some of these practices of yoga can get us there. It gets a lot of people there. I mean, I've had my own experiences there where meditation didn't do something that a physical practice sometimes associated with yoga would get me to, right? We do see that. You see that.
Well, I
the
think
world
what
sees that.
I think what it is with the physical practice is it makes it easy for the mind to focus and bring us to here. There's a sutra it's called Yoga Sthira Sukham Asanam, which means the asana has ease and effort. And we're looking for this sense of ease, and we find it through the effort. It's that understanding light through darkness. When you put the body through a lot of effort, it actually makes it easy for the mind to be here. It's why meditation is so hard, because it's so easy with the body. You're just sitting there, and so now the mind has nothing to latch onto. It has nothing to channel it. It's free to explore. Meditation is a much harder practice than physical asana, at least from my experience, being somebody that's always loved movement and gone that way. So it was really the hard physical movement was the handstands and all those things and the idea that I am supposed to be here. There is an intention behind it. Because I've done physical stuff my entire life, but I've never done it with the intention to understand who I am while doing it.
Let's talk about yoga then.
Okay.
Because I mean, well, first of all, I mean, you were doing martial arts in like 2001, and you got exposed to yoga for one of the first times, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you were like, okay, this is something. There's something here, and I need to explore it.
No, actually, so I kind of say that was my first experience with yoga, but I didn't understand what yoga was then. It was, I was doing asanas and stretching and warrior twos and boat pose. And in boat pose, my grandmaster would come by, and then he was like 5 feet tall, if that, and this old Korean guy in his late 70s, early 80s, and he'd heel kick me super hard in the stomach. He was an intense dude. Super intense. I once saw him changing a light bulb on a ladder, and it was on a mat, and it gave way, and he lost his balance, and he was like way up there, 12, 15 feet, and he just did a little roll, got up, and then climbed back, picked the ladder up, climbed back up there. I've never seen. But anyway, so he brought like the sense of yoga that martial arts does, of mindfulness and meditation and all that, but not in the way that I understood. We all need, it's like you tell somebody something over and over and over, and then somebody else tells them that person the same exact thing, and then they tell you, oh, I just figured it out. This person told me. And you're like, that's what I've been telling you forever. It's sometimes we just need to hear it in a different way from somebody else. And because I wasn't ready also for that. I wasn't ready. I was still just wanting to play in a rock band and do my thing and travel around and be a kid having fun. I wasn't ready to explore who I was yet. It wasn't until later, which I didn't even know I was ready to explore who I was yet, but I knew that something was missing in my life. I knew that I was unhappy, and it was because I got everything that I wanted.
Okay.
And I think I needed to get everything that I wanted to realize how unhappy I was, because I always thought that if I got everything that I want, I'll be happy. If I get everything that I want, everything will be okay.
What were you getting?
What was I?
Yeah, like what were you getting? Like I want to be a
I wanted to be
Marine.
successful.
Right.
I wanted to have a job that paid my bills. I wanted to have more than what I needed. You know, I think we think success is getting a little bit more than what you need. You know, so that was one of the things. Financially successful. I wanted to have a career that people admired and looked up to. So that's why I became a firefighter. Everyone likes firefighters. I wanted to own a home. Bought a house. I wanted a fancy car. I bought a ridiculous sports car. I wanted a beautiful girlfriend. I had a super hot girlfriend. And I had joy with all those things. I'm not saying that they weren't good things and that there's anything inherently wrong with any of that, but looking for those things and acquiring them just left a bigger hole. So this is, I think, Yuval Noah Harari, in his book *Sapiens*, he talks about the Squirrel Dilemma. Once there was a squirrel that went up and got an acorn, and then ate it, and then felt satisfied, everlasting satisfaction, and then died because it didn't have a desire to go out and get another one. We're programmed to have this sense of wanting more as soon as we get something. And it's inherent to who we are. And so if we live our lives like that, we're never going to be satisfied. We're never going to be content. So I think I needed all those things to be like, okay, this isn't the way.
And so about 10 years later, you decided to go in.
Yeah, about 10 years later, I was a firefighter. I had all those things. This was actually before the girlfriend, so I was like trying to go to dance classes to meet people or whatever, and then I was invited to yoga class. So I went to yoga class, and 2 weeks before that, I started doing handstands. I went to a Cirque du Soleil show.
Okay.
And I saw these people doing handstands. I'm like, that is so cool. So I went back to my rock climbing gym, and there's like a little workout area, and I started doing handstands in there.
Okay.
Learned how to do handstands, showed up to this power yoga class, and the owner of the studio was actually from my martial arts place. You know, so I knew who he was. I think we used to date sisters. Like he dated one sister, I dated another long time ago. But it was a comfortable space for me to walk into, because at that time no one was doing yoga, or no men were doing yoga.
Yeah, people forget, like 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago, there's just not a thing.
There was a couple, but it's, you know, yoga was for girls still at that time. And it's crazy how much it's changed.
Yeah.
But so I went in there and was doing handstands, and it felt cool, and it was a good workout. And then I met this girl that I dated for 5 years, and even then I still don't think I understood what it was. It was when I went and did a teacher training, which was shortly after that. Way too early for me to do a teacher training, but I'm kind of an extreme person, so whatever I go after, I go after it as hard as I can. I put
goals.
Everything into it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
You
goals.
still like that?
I was still just so goal oriented. I'm in the way that I put everything that I have into whatever I'm doing, but I don't do it expecting something out of it. The question, I think one of the questions that was sent to me before coming on this show is, what's my goal in 5 years? And no idea. I don't have a goal in 5 years. I don't want to set a goal for 5 years. When you start projecting into something that's not real, and you put expectations into that, whatever happens, unless it falls in line of that expectation that you want, is going to leave you unhappy. And then when you get there, you're going to realize that it's not what was going to make you happy either.
So no more goals for you. But
no more future goals.
Future goals, okay, right. And so you kept practicing. You did your teacher training.
I did my teacher training, and I think there's a pose in yoga called Tadasana, which means mountain pose. my teacher, he basically said he wanted me to find mountain pose in a handstand, which it wasn't like, a mountain pose is just standing straight up with your arms at your side. It's the most simple pose that you can do, but it's what does it mean to be a mountain? You know, if you look at a mountain, there's so much life that happens on the surface of it, and it's surrounded by change and everything is going on, but then at the core of it, it's still. It's centered, it's here, it's present with all the life that's happening. And when you could find that in something that's difficult, like a handstand, then you start to understand a little bit more about what it's about. And I think that was one of my first times of understanding presence, where that was my choice to be present. Because I've been present many times, but I didn't know I was present. I was just a thrill seeker before that, and I think where a lot of thrill seekers come from, they're present, but they don't understand that that's why it's so enjoyable.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.